Anyway, that's what my question is that this man went through the same struggle and same problem possibly as yours, but then he hasn't touched that. Even for in a book like in a House for Mr. Biswas, this first novel, he doesn't harp on that at all, as if he is an Englishman writing in English, and yet he's very much rooted in India and in Trinidad. He doesn't write about London so much. So, do you think that the London society has changed since then, and race has become more of a concern ever since? I mean, he's dated now.
Yeah,
possibly.
what decade was he in London? Do you remember, like, what years?
Yeah, I remember. 1970s.
70s. Okay, so I think London and the country's changing every decade. I think whoever's
the language is changing also.
The language, more mixing of languages. For me, it was really important that as well as using standard English, I used urban slang. I used Jamaican patois. I used Greek in the book as well. And it was really important for me to have a mix of languages because that was something I grew up around, language and dialects. But also, I think, the intersection of different cultures is really important to me and my writing. And I think thing is, you don't have to fit in, to be British. I don't think you have to be accepted by a higher society to be British.
Right.
I think everyone in every strata of society is British in their own way by virtue of living in the country, either being born there or being there a long time. You just become British by osmosis, and what British is changes by the people that are living there. And so I think decade upon decade, different people have lived in the UK and made homes there, and then also the mood has shifted depending on governments, depending on global affairs. I think at the moment, the book was done. By the time, Brexit was big news, but I think, any books being written right now, Brexit will feature because it's changed again what it's like. My mum, so when she was dating my father and they would together, they would get abuse in the street for being a black man and a white woman together. People would shout things, spit at my pram, that they were pushing me in, things like that would happen. And that was just the 80s. Now, I don't think that would happen for a couple of mixed race, but I have had, when I'm with a boyfriend holding hands, people will shout at me, hit us, chase us, shout from cars, threaten violence. And so, there are different struggles at different times. I think, again, now because of Brexit, there's people in the UK who...
That might be again...
That the race issue is coming back and people are saying, we voted for you to leave. They didn't think they just voted to leave the European Union. They think they voted for foreigners to leave the country. And they decide what a foreigner is based on appearance, based on the language they might speak, whether they've got an accent, even if they're white, if they sound like they've got a Polish accent or a European accent of any description. Really horrible things are happening in the UK right now around, nationalism. And that's fairly, it's not new, but it's come around, again. And I think this is the thing, things happen in cycles. I think whether it's your government or, whether it's kind of a national mood changing, it's difficult to predict what's going to happen next.
Since we are talking about, origins, race, you have always called yourself black, in spite of being mixed race. Could you elaborate on that?
I think that's a political choice for me. I think it's in solidarity with a wider black community. I think as a mixed race person, I have some privileges by being fairer skinned, by being in two different cultures through my family. But I think essentially my struggle is that of a black man, and I think that will be different to the struggle of a black woman or an Asian man or an Asian woman. But I think broadly black is the right term for it. But I think when we're getting down to the nitty gritty, being mixed and naming the cultures, Jamaica and Cyprus, are important as well. but I think you don't have the time to explain everything to everyone. So for me, I say black and gay, and those are words people understand, straightforward. So it's about economy of language, really, just saying things in as few words as possible, because you don't want to explain everything to everyone. Does that make sense?
Yes, that does. So the other thing that I really want to know is how much of your origins has influenced your poetry?
Definitely in language and vocabulary, my origins, and also, I'll write about food and things that are kind of evocative in a very, primal, basic way, to the senses. So sensory, imagery is there. And then I guess for me, growing up in Britain, in London, being born there, but still being asked every time, where are you from? When someone meets me, where are you from? And that is a question that made me question myself, because if you're asked it over and over again from a small child all the way up to an adult, you think, where am I from? Am I not from here? Why do they keep asking me? And so that question is very common. Anyone who's not white in the UK will have been asked that question many, many times. And I think it's a question that makes you reflect, where am I from? I've not lived for a long. I visit Cyprus and Jamaica, but I've never lived in those countries, so I wouldn't say I'm from there. And so it's interesting. I say I'm from London. I say I'm from England or Britain, but people question that. Now I live in Scotland, and so when people ask me where I'm from, I do say London, and they accept it. It's very different.
Mr. Bandyopadhyay wants to ask you a question.
Yes, no, I was just reading.
You just opened at random.
Yes, I opened at random. That's exactly. I reach out my left arm in their direction and pull them both into the hug. That's exactly what you said right now. And I I opened it, and you see, he means that. I reach out my left arm in their direction and pull them both into the hug. That means that you are. This, I think, reaching for identity, right? This, I think, reaching for being one with something that you are going through.
Yes, you're very right. And I think many people have that, and I think many people can relate to that, and sometimes it's about race and sometimes it's about other things, but I think we all want to feel like we belong somewhere, and I think that's a journey, it's not a destination. You won't just suddenly find somewhere and be like, this is home. Sometimes you find it within yourself.
But when you go back to London, from wherever you are, don't you feel that you're coming back home?
More and more, yeah. Since I don't live there anymore, it's a more interesting kind of journey to go back. And because all my family are there, and now I've got young nieces, and they are just something that I love to return to.
Your parents are all still there?
Yeah, my mum, my sister. But I think for me, it's the next generation. That's what really excites me. And seeing, children change so quickly. They're only 1 and 3 years old. And so seeing them change every time I go back, having more vocabulary, doing more independent things, having more interests, that's fascinating to me. I want to write children's books next. This is kind of like the next chapter for me, is to write books for little children. Now, I don't have children of my own, but being an uncle, I just see how excited they are by stories and play, and I'd love to write things that reflect kind of the way they see the world, because it's so fascinating.
And one last question from me, at least. Is there any other place in the world where you'd feel at home?
For me, wherever my boyfriend is. And he's a doctor.
He's now in Glasgow, right?
He's in Glasgow, but he's a doctor, and he's a doctor of tropical medicine. So with his job, we may be traveling around the world in the future. And so I think wherever I am with him will feel like home.
So the main guiding force for you is love.
Love is, yes.
So there you are.
So you were speaking of writing poetry so long. Who are the poets who have influenced you?
I think early on, Maya Angelou, who is an African-American writer, and she writes very strong, very clear messages in her work about women, about black people, about freedom, about equality. Benjamin Zephaniah, a British Jamaican poet, again, very strong, very clear, very defiant Lem Sise, Selena Godden, other British poets, Derek Walcott, who I had the pleasure of meeting and working with a couple of times, who is an amazing writer from St. Lucia and, very much respected and admired and canonical. John Agard, again, and Grace Nichols. So many. The thing is, when you ask me to name poets, I would just list and list and list. But there's other poets of my generation, such as Keith Jarrett, who is a Jamaican British poet, and Travis Alabanza, Yersa Daly Ward, all worth checking out, and so many more. I could make you a reading list if you want it.
Absolutely. And talking of reading lists, talking of advice to the students, what would you like to advise our SNU students?
Oh, read really broadly, read outside of your own experience, read, work in translation from other languages as well. Ask friends what they're reading. It's such an interesting way to connect with people. If you ask someone, what's a good book you read recently, or an individual poem that moved you or meant something to you, and then you can have a conversation about it later. I always love to hear from someone like what they've read, and then I can read it, and then we can be back in touch and talk about it. I think books can really connect people, and I think that's a lovely way to do it as well. And if you ever get the chance to meet authors, and get their books from them, I think that's a really special interaction as well. So go to book festivals.
Author-signed books.
Signed books by authors. I think a library is even more special when you've had some of those books signed by the author. It just feels magic.
Absolutely. And that for you was Dean Atta. Dean Atta stands to me for strength, for defiance, and for beautifully carved words. Thank you so much for being here on SNU Reel. Thank you so much, Mr. Bandyopadhyay, for being with us on SNU Reel. The students on the SNU campus have been so privileged and honored to have you among us.
Thank you.
And with that, I end today, or your host, Srabasti, on SNU Reel. Thank you.